Hi, Women of Welcome. I am Sarah Casada, and I'm so glad you are joining us for today's conversation. We are going to be talking about how to engage well in conversations about immigrants and refugees. We're going to talk about how to engage with confidence and with compassion and grace and kindness. And this is something that comes up from time to time in our community because it is something that almost everyone experiences at some point. So it's really fun for us to be able to have a conversation specifically about this topic. For those of you who are new to Women of Welcome, we are a Christian community of women pursuing compassion and Christ-like welcome towards immigrants and refugees. You are invited to join us on our Facebook page and Instagram at Women of Welcome. And if you're looking for a more private place to ask sincere questions or dialogue with other women who are learning in the same space, we have a Facebook private group that is just for you. And it's also called Women of Welcome. So we encourage you to find us there and to go deeper with this community. It is truly just a joyous group of women who are looking to love their neighbors and share Christ-like welcome with immigrants and refugees. So today, I'm really excited to introduce you to Brittani, who is on our Women of Welcome team. And she is a graduate of Wheaton, which you may have heard of, in the Chicago area. And while she was there, she spent time on their debate team and then later served as one of the team's coaches. And she has also had just sort of this chance interaction with refugees newly arrived from Syria that channeled her passion specifically into how do we welcome newcomers. And it helped her forge deep friendships, and they eventually founded a catering company. So she has just this beautiful mix of experience with both a refugee family and this idea, not necessarily of debate, because if you're like me, that word itself makes me like, I don't want to debate anyone, but using those strategies to help us engage well. So I am going to bring Brittani in. And I just think you're going to be so delighted to meet her. Hi, Brittani.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. It has been such a joy for us to get to work together on the Women of Welcome team. And, I think this topic in particular is one that I have just been both very excited for us to talk about because I know how much I think it can really help women to think about this topic. But also I feel a little nervous because I'm more of a sweaty confrontation kind of person. We did kind of some this or that slides on our Instagram of are you fight or flight? And we have both in our community for sure. I would say for the most part, I'm a flighter. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go find some Chex Mix to get out of this situation. So I think
And yet you wrote a whole book about immigration, Sarah.
I know. I know. I was hoping no one would read it, but some people did, which was great. Yes. And so I think, for a lot of us, we're looking towards the holidays. And for many people, that means we're interacting with folks we don't often interact with in our day-to-day life. And sometimes, no matter how many times people warn against it, the conversation turns towards controversial topics. And it can be kind of unsettling for those of us who want to demonstrate and share and invite others into this compassion towards immigrants and refugees. So I'll start out with the first question for you is we talk about when do we speak up? What kind of leads us to know when do we engage with people? What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a good question. I wish I had a formula. One thing I'll say at first, though, is that I feel like one gift of when you enter into this space of relationships with immigrants and refugees is people might come to you to have the conversation, and that's great because it's clear how to engage because they have asked you the question. But I'm imagining what many of us are thinking about is like, oh, someone said something we're really uncomfortable with around the dinner table and we don't know what to do. And I think a couple of things. I think the first one is, does that person have a baseline of compassion? Are they a person who you think has some kind of compassion towards immigrants and refugees, whether or not that is the same level or as thought through as yours? Because I think if there's a base level of compassion, there's often a conversation that can be had there. I think if there's not a base level of compassion, what I try to do is say something small that builds empathy. And the example I think of is actually something I wish I had said. So it's a full disclosure. I did not do this situation, but I remember
I've always had the greatest responses 2 days later.
100%, except for this is like several years later. So, but I remember being in a room, a very similar holiday gathering type of place, and someone was making a joke, kind of the like, why should I have to press one for English? You know, we've probably all of us have heard some variety of that. And what I had wished I had said was just, oh man, I am so bad at learning new languages. I have so much empathy for anyone else trying to learn a new one, because it's not combative. If anything, it diffuses the situation, and probably a lot of other people are really thankful that it brought the volume down, and it opens the door to show that you're a person who's interested in these conversations without coming and swinging with all your talking points.
Yes. I feel like, especially in sort of the vibe of the world today, we all see talking points coming like a mile away. You can almost know, oh, somebody just said this. I can guess what, this person over here is going to say in response to that. And it's exhausting. At least that's my perception, is it's just absolutely exhausting. But I think some of it, and we'll talk about, we'll share this again at the end, but I'm going to mention it now. This book, I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening.
I've got mine right here.
Yeah, it's such a good book. But I remember I read it a couple of years ago, but I still remember the title of this chapter was Take Off Your Jersey, because they talk a lot about sort of that sports mentality that's really a big part, I think, of US culture. But this idea that there always has to be winners and losers in a conversation, and how if we can, and in our politics, really, that rather than being, a group of people working to solve collective problems, we're two teams and you have to pick one, and one of you has to lose. And so kind of with that framework going in our mind, when we think about stepping into these brave conversations, what are our goals? What are we hoping for? What does winning look like? Or maybe the better question is, how do we reframe winning? Like what does that look like in these conversations?
That is such a good question. And honestly, that's where I have to take off my debate hat, because again, in debate, there is a winner and there's a loser, and
that's true.
You want to be the winner. But yeah, that's not a great way to talk to your uncle. So I think one of the things that when I was thinking about this question is, I feel like one success of a win is, would this person talk to you about this again? Like,
oh, I love that.
Did they walk away feeling heard? Did they learn something? Do they feel respected? Because I can think of a lot of people who I've had one conversation with, and I'm like, oh, I don't talk about this issue with them anymore. But to be a person where someone was like, wow, I disagree, but that was a good conversation. That was fun. We understood each other. I think that might be how we could reframe a win here.
I love that, of this idea of maybe somebody, I think too often we get like, people have to 180 their views in this one conversation. This is my one chance to turn the ship. And I think this idea of, could we start a journey? Could we, plant that seed? Could we have a conversation that's enjoyable enough that people are actually like, I learned something. I felt like I shared something, and this idea that then maybe they'll come back and that will continue this conversation. I think, I love that. I'm going to keep that in my mind. Will someone talk to me about this again? Because it also takes the pressure off of me to get all my statistics and stories and data and all, you don't have to if it's an ongoing relational conversation, which is
absolutely
more normal.
Right. It's like that's how we operate in every other sphere of life. Like when we're making a new friend, we're not like, here's my whole life story today. But it does feel more urgent when it's this passion, something that we care about. We want to share everything.
Absolutely, because there's emotion involved in it, which is one reason why we can be either excited to talk about it or excited to walk away. Excited to walk away. I just gave myself away there, but we talked about, as we were promoting this event, we said we're going to give you 7 tips for productive conversation. And some of these are because of your debate background. And I just think really are so helpful for us. So why don't you walk us through some of these tips for productive conversation?
Absolutely. So tip number 1 would be respond to your conversation partner as if they made the best version of their argument. So this is something we talk a lot when we're debate coaching. When new debaters join the team, the way that, for example, the whole Wheaton team gets better is we have practice debates against each other, right? And can a 4th-year debater very easily beat a 1st-year debater? Yes, of course they can. They've been doing it a while, and the 1st-year debater is just learning even the rules of engagement, if you will. But neither of them get better. Neither team gets better if you just win on technicalities, I feel like it's the equivalent of correcting someone's grammar on the internet instead of just engaging with their conversation. And, do I have a grammar correcting impulse? I hear you. But who grew from that interaction? And I think if you take someone at their best instead of just jumping to correction, then both of you will learn more from the conversation. So that's the first thing I would say.
Oh, that's so good. Don't waste time just eviscerating someone on a technicality. That's just wasted pain that's not going to move you forward together.
Exactly. And I think in the immigration space, we do this a lot with statistics. And there's a really good room for statistics. Women of Welcome share statistics. Like it's really helpful, but it's probably not the thing to lead with. It's probably you come back to it later if they want to see some sources.
Yeah. All right. What's tip number 2?
Tip number 2 is consider the core fear. So especially when we talk about immigration or really anything that might get your blood boiling a little bit, you have that physical sensation in your body, is there's probably a level of fear behind it. And if we can engage what the fear is instead of, again, just coming to correct the statement that they made, I think there's so much more empathy there, because I think we can talk about this later, maybe if we try out some examples, but a lot of us have fears because of safety. And that's something I can empathize with, because I also want my family to be safe. And we might just have really different things that we feel unsafe by. And maybe that's where we can have the conversation. But I think once we engage the core fear, there's so much room for commonality and understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Which actually leads really well to tip number 3.
Yes. Tip 3, seek common ground. I think this just levels any conversation. It is so good to get on the same page in some way. And sometimes common ground is really hard to find. Yeah. But something that I feel like I've learned from you and Bree, Sarah, is that if we are Christians, so if the person we're talking to is also a Christian, the common ground we have is that we believe that immigrants are made in the image of God. And if you can start the conversation there, I think it shifts the whole tone, because it is true that maybe not everyone will be able to stay or, all of the things about immigration. But if we can anchor it in, but that person is an image bearer of God, it's really hard for the conversation to be quite as heated, I think.
Yeah. And I think too, one of the things we hear a lot here at Women of Welcome is, I don't have a problem with legal immigration. It's illegal immigration that I take issue with, which is understandable. And there's ways to address that. But I think, that common ground sometimes can simply be, I don't have an issue with legal immigration. And so really being able to build on that of, did you know asylum seeking is legal? And those kinds of things, depending on the person, being able to hear that, not in a way to sort of catch them in a zinger, but to really help understand, like, I think all of us would desire legal immigration to be the main and only way people are coming into the States. And so what does that mean? What does it look like to expand legal immigration? Why are people entering outside of those legal pathways? And those are different questions than when things get framed just as like immigration, pro or con,
100%. I think that's so wise, Sarah.
What's your next tip for us?
Okay, remember my numbers. Tip 4 is tailor your responses. And that is a lot easier to do if it's someone we know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's someone we're sharing a holiday meal with, we probably know them to some extent. And so I think that's just not in a manipulative way, but just knowing like which sources might this friend respond to. Not bashing a political party or a candidate that they really love.
What do they care about? What's going to be the things that are of interest to them?
Totally. You know? Because the thing about immigration is it intersects with so many other things that you might care about. And there's lots of space for common ground there. And I think, yeah, part of just being a considerate conversation partner is not pushing buttons unnecessarily that just to anger each other.
Yeah. And I think, you know, things are going to resonate more with a person you're talking to if you're thinking about what is their context, what do they care about? You know, the reason that made me think of that is several years ago, I was at a conference that was talking about different things. And there was a portion where we were going to go speak to our lawmakers. And I was amazed. I was around so many people in the restaurant. Somehow where I was sitting, I was like in the restaurant industry. And, you know, it was just a group of people I had personally never interacted with because of that. But they had very passionate views on immigration and wanting to expand legal opportunities for workers because they were bumping up against challenges in their industry that weren't being addressed in our current immigration system. And it was so eye-opening. Same with agriculture and some of these other things. And so even people who maybe are not in the same context as you, there are things that they care about that are connected to this topic that can be ways that we kind of tailor those to those responses as well. And the next tip you're kind of already talking about, which is considering our language. Yeah.
I fear I condensed these into one here. But yeah, I think consider your language. You know, certain, like we said, like if someone really loves a certain candidate, don't come out swinging against that candidate. Like that's not helpful. And I think those of us who care about immigration know that immigration is so much bigger than a candidate or a party. I think the U.S. has been struggling to figure out what our immigration should look like for long enough that we know that this kind of transcends a particular political party. So, and just again, like we would when we were talking to a friend about anything else, you know, we don't want to bash the things that they love if we can avoid it.
Exactly. And kind of going back to your earlier point about is our goal, will they talk to us again? Can we kind of move the needle? We all know that you can shut down a conversation before it even starts with certain sources or certain candidates and it's just, it really distracts from what our hope is for these conversations, which is for us to grow together toward a more welcoming, you know, worldview. And so I think it absolutely, when we get sometimes in the heat of the moment, or if, you know, we're processing our own frustrations and anger onto somebody else, but it actually doesn't serve the conversation. It doesn't serve that person well.
And I think that circles back to the point you made earlier about like take off your jersey, because when we don't have to try to fully defend a candidate or fully defend a party, that's where we have room to find our common ground, to find what we have in common.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Tip number 6.
Okay. Tip number 6 is definitely coming from the debate side of things. So resist proving how much you know. So a lot of us, when we start caring about refugees and immigrants, we learn a lot and we have a lot of information to share. But our loved ones did not sign up for a TED Talk when they asked us what we're thinking about these days, you know? And so, but I think we have this like, gotta tell them everything, because if I can just get all of the right information in front of them, maybe they'll start caring about the thing that I care about. When in reality, for me, I was ideologically a person who cared about refugees, but it was meeting refugees that really ignited the fire in me. And in the same way, I don't think as persuasive as our information is, and you know, for me, this is humbling for me to have to say, as persuasive of an argument as I might make to you, that's not going to be what exactly moves the needle here. So we don't have to tell you everything all at once in one conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is actually perfect for number 7, which is almost the opposite.
It is the opposite. It is, don't be afraid to say that you don't know. I really struggle with this. I want to have an answer for any possible thing that could come up, but I actually think that's pretty crippling. I think that keeps a lot of us from engaging in conversations because we don't have an answer for everything. But I don't think we have to, because I think, God's hand doesn't, the plan that God has and the goodness that we know that, refugees and immigrants are made in his image, that doesn't change no matter how well we perform in this conversation. So we don't have to worry that saying the wrong thing somehow the mission is not carried forward,
Absolutely.
Because that's ultimately like the Holy Spirit's work. And I also think I don't know is really relatable. Like, I think that goes back to someone feels safer talking to you because they don't feel like you're just, spitting out information. Like, you're willing to say what you don't know. I think goes a long way too.
It's so, I feel like we hear this a lot in our community. It's like, well, I don't know exactly how to explain the special immigrant visa program, then I shouldn't even engage at all. Right. And so,
yeah.
And that's just, I always joke, the book Immigration Made Easy is over 600 pages long. And so this idea that any one of us on a given day would be able to rattle off information about any question about the facets of immigration, it's just not realistic. It's paralyzing. It will keep us from ever stepping into those spaces because we'll never know it all. And to be honest with you, because I know quite a bit of things about immigration and then they keep changing.
Right.
And so while I may have been right about this a week ago, I might not know now what's exactly going on. And so I think there is a humility in that. And honestly, too, you're also modeling that for this person that you're talking with, that they can admit they don't know about something in this conversation as well. So I think that is just such an important and underutilized phrase in this conversation and conversations in general these days. All right. So I'm going to lead you. I'm going to give you an example. All right.
Okay.
So I need you to show me what you know.
All right. Okay. But not too much. No.
So exactly. So, so say we're sitting at a holiday table and someone says, people just need to come here legally. We have to keep our kids safe from criminals and we can't just let anyone sneak into the country. What would you say to that, Brittani? What would be your process of breaking that down?
Let me walk you through the internal dialogue there. So I think if we think about the core fear, it sounds like their core fear is safety and concern about the rule of law. So that's something to keep in the back of our mind. And those might be things we can find once we're thinking about common ground. Those are things that we can think about. For me, the next step would be that resist the tendency to try to explain everything to them. So not everything, what I happen to know. So like I might want to say asylum is legal and make sure you're using dignified language and here's statistics and asylum seekers don't commit very many crimes and the border is secure. Like I want to say like all of these things. But that is not a conversation. That is a monologue. And then so when we think about things we have in common, so one thing I would think is like, I also maybe share your core fear about safety in general, even if I don't feel unsafe with immigrants. But if I'm talking to you, Sarah, we both have children. So maybe that is a piece of common ground here. So we could say something like, I totally share your desire to want our kids to be safe. I don't know about you, but just the walk to the playground is nerve-wracking. Like, what if she runs in front of a car? We're in toddler stage over here. And there's nothing more that I want for my daughter than a life where she can flourish and live safely. I wonder if that's the same impulse that is pushing parents to keep asylum, because I think that's a lot of parents' core desire. And asylum is actually one of our legal immigration paths to the United States. And weirdly or not, but the way asylum works is you actually have to get here first. Like the only way to seek asylum is to be in our borders. So it can seem so counterintuitive to say you illegally cross a border to legally claim asylum, but that's the system we're working with. So what are your fears there? Are you concerned that about vetting? Do you feel like people aren't being vetted properly? Like, tell me more about where you're coming from here.
Oh, I love that you ended that on a question, because again, rather than, to use your phrase, delivering a TED talk to people when they bring up this topic, it really says, how do we kind of keep this going? And I want to engage this with you. I'm open to doing that. That was a great response. I love how you found common ground and really tried to sort of see behind some of the inflammatory language, maybe, of an argument, to really see behind what are people afraid of? What are they really asking? What are they nervous about? And how can we kind of engage those along the way? All right. So let me ask you this. I follow all of Brittani's tips. I'm the perfect holiday guest, and it's not going well. And I'm feeling attacked, or I feel like I'm not being heard. This person is not wanting to talk to. Where do we go from there? What do we do when the conversation is not going well?
Oh, it is such a good question. And I wish I would say it has never happened to me, but oh, has it? I mean, I think you take a breath, because I think your body does kind of go into that fight or flight mode when someone's pushing back really aggressively, or you don't know what to say, you're feeling overwhelmed. You take a breath and you kind of, whatever that mantra is to yourself of like, God is still good, God is still working, no matter how this conversation goes. And then I think you quickly kind of revisit this question about what relationship you have with the person. I think it's Evangelical Immigration Table has this question of like, am I willing to learn from this person? Like, I hope they're willing to learn from me. And sometimes the answer is no. And I think if the answer is no, if someone is really, really belligerent, I think you can just say like, I don't think this conversation's getting us anywhere. Let's talk about something else. And that's okay. That's okay to do. I also think if it hasn't reached that level of belligerence, but it's not going well, you can just shift into question asking mode and kind of consider it research. Consider it, what are people who are thinking different than me feeling like? And just trust that you sharing this has still made a difference, whether to that person or the group.
Yeah. I just saw recently that Dr. Russell Moore, who has spoken to our community as well, has started a segment on his podcast. I think it's called like Prove Me Wrong or something like that, where he invites.
Oh, I saw this. Yeah.
Who disagrees with him on an issue, and he can only ask questions. And I thought, what an interesting premise. And I do think that's good advice. If the conversation, if you feel like this person can't hear me for whatever is going on in their mind and heart at the moment, they can't hear a different point of view, then let me ask some questions. Let me see if that opens a door, or if nothing else, that I learn more about what other people are feeling and experiencing, so that I can better care for them and love them going forward. And then this is, so I think for my personality, if I'm in a conversation and someone is just fighting me on every point, I just feel terrible. I feel like somehow I've done this wrong. Somehow I shouldn't have gotten involved in this way. I just have all these kinds of thoughts of like that. I should have just never engaged, right? But I think there's this surprise benefit that we forget, especially around the holidays, is that there are others who are watching and listening to you, even if they never speak up. And I think we see this a lot of time. Of course, Women of Welcome is online, but we know, and we've seen in other conversations, even that are in person, that people are curious about this topic, and people are listening and watching to see how you'll respond, even if they don't want to enter the conversation, especially maybe while that person's still there, right? But they're watching not only the information you're sharing about our immigration system, but they're also watching how you're engaging. And so your kind of testimony in this process goes beyond simply, did the person I was talking to hear me and say, Sarah, that was brilliant. Let's do this again. Because that's an unlikely measure of success, right? But this idea that there are cousins and nieces and nephews and aunts and uncles who are, just listening. And you never know what God is doing in that person's heart.
It is so true. I remember a conversation I had over the summer with a loved one. Again, it was not one that I started, I think, again, because, I have this new job with Women of Welcome. And so this person was like, I'm going to share my current thoughts about immigration. It was a good conversation. But again, I don't think either of us, I wouldn't have moved the needle necessarily. But someone else who was nearby came up to me afterwards and was like, I had no idea you had to be in the U.S. to seek asylum. And I think that was just such a clear example of the ripples that these conversations can have. And I think for those of us who feel like the Lord has called us into care for this population, like this is one way that we can kind of go first and model that peaceful presence, model the confidence we do have. We have a lot of confidence that the Lord really cares about immigrants. We have that woven through the whole Bible. And when we go first, it gives other people permission. And I think people are watching.
Yeah, I love that. And then, you got to get out of your body. So go for a run or call a friend. And
you can go for a run, Sarah.
And if you don't, and I'll just use this as a small plug. If you don't have people in your life that you can go back to and say, man, I just had a really hard conversation with this person, please join our private Facebook group, because there is constantly times when women come in and share, hey, I'm about to speak at my church and I'm really nervous. Would you pray for me? And then people, how did it go? We want to know. And they'll say, I had this positive experience, I had this negative experience, and this is a community that can encourage each other in those brave conversations.
Totally. And sometimes people will even say, someone just left this comment on my Facebook post. How would you respond? And then you just get these wealth of answers from these compassionate Christian women, and it's so encouraging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brittani, this has been so helpful. It's so helpful. Even, I think there's things that I kind of know intuitively, but even just to lay it out and to really kind of, as my counselor says, like set your intention for going into some of these brave spaces of this is the way I want to speak and to show welcome and love to everyone that I encounter, including those who may be really resistant or not open to kind of some of the ways God's moving my heart towards immigrants and refugees. But we also want to leave you with some additional resources. I already mentioned one. I really did that out of order, but this is an excellent book. I think
it's so good.
I think it's back. Was it backwards on the screen? I don't know, but it's called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, A Guide to Grace-Filled Political Conversations. This is really, really good. I think it was last year, we as a community read this book by Eugene Cho, Thou Shalt Not Be a Jerk, A Christian's Guide to Engaging Politics.
The title alone is so good.
I know. And it's what we hope for ourselves and others. So those are just two really great resources. And if you don't have time to read a book, which I completely understand, everyone's in a different life season, we'd have a conversation like this with Eugene Cho about this book that I highly recommend. Take 40 minutes or an hour to watch that this holiday time. And it will just help you again to really think through how do you want to be present in these spaces. And do you want to share our other resource, our Women of Welcome resource?
Yeah, so I also cannot speak highly enough of the Women of Welcome equipping series. I feel like I can really hype it up because I had no role in creating it. So I'm somewhat neutral. But so these are something you create a login on the website, and then you're going to have access to, I want to say almost 20 videos. I don't remember the exact number. But they are just, each one is just packed full of wise Christian leaders. So there's questions just as general as, what is Christ-like welcome? What do we do with the scripture passages that are telling us we need to follow the laws of the land? Is the border secure? There are these big questions, and they're answered thoughtfully and gracefully. And most of them they're kind of like 5 to 20, 30-minute videos. So you can fit them in as you're doing other things. But I have found that I am not a theologian, and I'm probably never going to be one, but it's really encouraging to know that like trusted thinkers are thinking about these questions and they have wisdom for us. I find it just gives a lot of, as Bree would say, confidence to our compassion.
Absolutely. And this, in this conversation, we've talked a lot about kind of the mechanics of how to have these conversations. And the equipping series is really great for helping for what are the common questions that you have yourself or that you're being asked, and what are some responses to those. And some of the people that participated in creating these videos, Dr. Russell Moore, Shannon Martin, Jamie Ivey, Jenny Yang, Matthew Sorens, and I'm sure I'm forgetting several people, but so there's different folks addressing these different questions, and it's just really, really helpful.
Dr. Russell Moore's video about like, should we be concerned that immigrants are changing U.S. culture? I feel like every line that he speaks in that could be its own inspirational quote somewhere. It's just so full of wisdom for us.
It is. And it's a question that a lot of people have that maybe they're afraid to voice, or maybe they're not, but there's a, question behind that of changing culture and what does that look like? And so, yeah, we cannot recommend that series highly enough. You can find it on our website. Like Brittany said, you create a little login and you get access to all of the videos. And our website is womenofwelcome.com. And so, so the last question I'm going to ask you, Brittany, because we ask all of our guests in these conversations, how would you describe what is Christ-like welcome?
Oh, I love this question. To me, Christ-like welcome is ready for you. It is prepared, and it is thoughtfully prepared. I have a friend who talked about how growing up, a lesson her mother taught her was you always have the kettle on the stove so that as soon as someone walks in, you can turn it on and tea will be ready in 5 minutes. And I love that, because most days no one might come by, but you are always ready if a guest arrives. And I feel like that is the welcome of Jesus. Like, he is always ready for us to show up. And how lucky are we to experience that welcome?
What a beautiful image just of that tea kettle. I think that's just such a tangible image of that welcome. And so, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Brittany, for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. Thank you for those of you who are watching live and those of you that are watching the replay. We're glad you're here. As always, if you want to connect with us, we are Women of Welcome on Facebook, including our private group, and on Instagram. We exist to create life-changing welcome, and you are always invited. We're glad you're here.
Bye, Sarah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.